used to think monsters were born in other people's homes, never mine. But the night police officers stood in my living room, telling me my 12-year-old son Ethan had nearly let a girl from his class, I realized the monster had been growing under my own roof all along. Before that night, I thought I had the perfect life. My husband Michael and I lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Oregon, where the houses were close enough for kids to run between backyards but far enough apart to feel private. We had been married 14 years, raising our only child Ethan, in what I truly believed was a warm and stable home. I'm Clara. I worked part-time as a nurse at a local clinic, balancing shifts around school runs, soccer practices, and piano recitals. Michael was a software engineer who came home every evening by 6. Our life looked ordinary, enviable even. Family dinners, weekend barbecues, vacations to Yellowstone and Disneyland. Ethan was polite around other adults, excelled at math, and teachers often complimented us. He's so bright. You must be proud. And I was. Proud enough to ignore the small cracks. At 9, Ethan stopped wanting to play with neighborhood kids. He complained they were boring or stupid. I figured it was a phase. He preferred puzzles, strategy games, and building elaborate Lego fortresses. When he was left out of birthday parties, I reassured him, and myself, that other children just didn't get him. But sometimes, when I looked into his eyes, I saw something unsettling, a cold stillness, like he was studying me rather than connecting. When I scolded him for snapping at me or Michael, his face wouldn't redden with guilt or soften with tears. He would just stare. Then, without warning, he'd flash a smile, mutter, "Sorry, Mom," and wander off, leaving me confused about whether he truly felt remorse. Michael brushed off my concerns. He's analytical. Detached, maybe, but that's a strength. You'll see, he'll be a leader someday. I wanted to believe that. So I convinced myself his quirks were signs of intelligence, not warning bells. When Ethan turned 10, he brought home a stray bird. Its wing was broken, and he'd tucked it into a shoebox. My heart swelled. I thought finally, he's showing empathy. But the next day, I found the shoebox empty. The bird was gone. Ethan shrugged when I asked. It died, he said flatly. I buried it. Something about his tone made me uneasy. It wasn't grief. It wasn't even indifference. It was almost satisfaction. That night, I dreamt of the bird clawing at the box, desperate to escape. Still, I kept dismissing these feelings. I told myself kids experiment, they test boundaries. I told myself he was fine. But little incidents kept stacking. There was Sophie Novak, a sweet, quiet girl who lived 3 houses down. Her family had moved to the neighborhood when Ethan was 11, and Sophie quickly became the child everyone adored. She painted colorful chalk murals on the sidewalk, baked cookies with her mom for school events, and invited other kids to play in her backyard. Ethan never liked her. He'd roll his eyes whenever I praised her kindness or compared her good grades to his. She's fake, he muttered once. Everyone thinks she's perfect. She's not. I thought it was jealousy, a passing annoyance. But his dislike soon hardened into something darker. At first, it was small. He erased her name from the whiteboard during class volunteer sign-ups. He accidentally spilled juice on her project at a school fair. Teachers brushed it off as childish rivalry. But I saw the glint in his eyes when he recounted these incidents. Not frustration, not embarrassment, but pleasure. One evening, while setting the table, I overheard him whispering in his room. Curious, I leaned closer to the door. His voice was calm, almost rehearsed. Nobody will like you forever, Sophie. They'll see who you really are. I froze. When I asked later who he had been talking to, he smirked. Just practicing speeches. Maybe I'll be a lawyer someday. It was clever, plausible, but my stomach churned. By 12, the distance between Ethan and other children widened into a chasm. Teachers said he was brilliant but difficult. Parents stopped inviting him over. Even at home, Michael and I began walking on eggshells. If we asked about his day and he didn't want to answer, he'd glare with such intensity that it silenced us. Then came the first truly undeniable moment, the one I can't forget no matter how I try. Our neighbors hosted a block party. Sophie was there, handing out cupcakes she'd baked with her mom. Ethan took one, smiled politely, then waited until her back was turned to drop it in the grass, grinding it under his shoe. I scolded him quietly, embarrassed. That was uncalled for. He leaned in, his voice low so only I could hear. I could do worse. My blood ran cold. But before I could respond, he straightened up, plastered on a boyish grin, and ran off to play frisbee with Michael as if nothing had happened. Everyone else saw a bright, athletic boy bonding with his father. Only I felt the shadow creeping across our family. And still, I said nothing. Because how could I admit that my son, the child I carried, the boy I kissed goodnight, was starting to terrify me? The first undeniable warning bell rang the fall Ethan started 7th grade. By then, the small incidents I had brushed off, the bird in the shoebox, the cupcake ground into the grass, were beginning to form a pattern. I didn't want to see it, but deep down, I knew. It began with Sophie Novak again. She was 12, same age as Ethan, and by every account a sweet, thoughtful child. Teachers adored her. Parents trusted her. Other kids followed her lead. In any other world, she should have been a harmless neighbor. But to Ethan, Sophie was a target. One October afternoon, I got a call from the school counselor, Mrs. Harlow. She wanted me to come in, just to discuss some social concerns. My stomach tightened immediately. When I arrived, Mrs. Harlow's office smelled of peppermint tea and was decorated with posters of motivational quotes. Sophie sat on a chair, her eyes red from crying. Ethan sat across from her, slouched, arms crossed, expressionless. Mrs. Grant, the counselor began gently, we've had a few incidents. Sophie reported that Ethan has been saying unsettling things to her. I turned to my son. His face was calm, detached, almost bored. Like what? I asked carefully. Sophie's voice trembled. He said if I told on him, no one would ever find my cat again. And that he could make me disappear if he wanted. My heart stopped. I looked at Ethan, searching for guilt, fear, anything human. Instead, he shrugged. She's lying. She just wants attention. Everyone knows she's the teacher's pet. Mrs. Harlow intervened, explaining that this wasn't the first complaint. There had been whispers of Ethan stealing Sophie's notebook, leaving cruel notes in her locker, even following her home after school. Michael arrived halfway through the meeting. He listened quietly, then placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. I'm sure this is a misunderstanding. Boys at this age test limits. He doesn't mean harm. But Sophie's face told another story. She was genuinely afraid. And for the first time, I couldn't dismiss it. That night, I confronted Ethan in his room. Why would she say those things if they weren't true? He looked up from the chessboard he had been arranging and smiled faintly. Because she's weak. Weak people lie when they're scared. Scared of what? I pressed. His smile widened. Me. The air left my lungs. Ethan, I whispered, that's not funny. I'm not joking, Mom. His tone was calm, matter of fact. You should be glad. Nobody messes with me. That means nobody will mess with you either. I backed out of his room, shaken to my core. I wanted to tell Michael what I'd heard, but I already knew his response. He would say Ethan was posturing, bluffing, trying to act tough. Boys will be boys. Don't overreact. But deep down, I knew it wasn't bluffing. It was a confession. The second warning came weeks later, on Halloween. The neighborhood kids dressed up and ran door to door with pillowcases full of candy. Ethan wore a vampire cape, his face painted pale. He looked almost too convincing. That night, after the trick-or-treating was done, I found him in the garage. He had dumped his candy on the workbench, but instead of sorting sweets, he was holding Sophie's little stuffed pumpkin toy, the one she carried everywhere. I didn't even know how he'd gotten it. Where did you get this? I asked sharply. He didn't flinch. Borrowed it. I grabbed the toy from his hands. Ethan, this isn't yours. You need to give it back. For the first time, his mask slipped. His eyes narrowed, his lips curled into a sneer. What if I don't? The venom in his voice terrified me. He was 12 years old, but in that moment, he sounded like a grown man making a threat. I forced myself to stay calm. You will. Tomorrow. He didn't argue further, but the look in his eyes said it all. This wasn't over. That night, I lay awake beside Michael, staring at the ceiling. Something's wrong with him, I whispered. Michael sighed. Clara, he's a kid. A difficult one, maybe, but he's not dangerous. But I wasn't so sure anymore. The third and loudest warning came at Thanksgiving. We had invited neighbors, including the Novaks, for dinner. It was supposed to be a warm evening, laughter and pumpkin pie, but halfway through the meal, Sophie screamed. Her cat, Whiskers, had been let out of its carrier in the backyard. Sophie ran outside to find it dangling from the oak tree, tied by its leash just high enough that its paws barely touched the ground. The poor animal clawed frantically, choking. We rushed out. Michael cut it down, Sophie sobbing as she clutched the trembling cat to her chest. Everyone turned to Ethan. He stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching. No fear. No surprise. Just watching. Ethan! I shouted. Did you do this? He tilted his head, expression unreadable. If I did, would you even believe me? The silence was deafening. The Novaks left immediately, their daughter still crying. Michael mumbled apologies, insisting it had to be a mistake. But when I looked into Ethan's eyes, I knew. That was the night I stopped telling myself excuses. My son wasn't just mischievous or jealous. Something darker was growing inside him. Something I didn't know how to stop. And I was terrified of what would come next. After Thanksgiving, nothing in our neighborhood felt the same. The Novaks no longer waved from across the street. Sophie wouldn't look me in the eye when we passed each other. Whisker survived, but the way that poor animal trembled in her arms that night left an image burned into my mind, and into everyone else's. It was subtle at first. Invitations to playdates stopped coming. Parents who once asked if Ethan wanted to join their kids for basketball or sleepovers grew strangely quiet. At church, I caught whispers behind me, words carried like smoke. That boy, something's not right. I wanted to scream at them, to defend him. He's just a child. My child. But the truth was, I had began to fear him too. Michael remained firmly in denial. He insisted that the incident with the cat was a misunderstanding, that Ethan had been nearby, but not responsible. Kids experiment. Sometimes they push too far, he said, brushing it off like a scraped knee. But I knew better. I had seen Ethan's face. That chilling stillness. That calculated detachment. At school, the walls were closing in. The counselor called me in again. Mrs. Grant, she began gently, several students are expressing fear of Ethan. They say he follows them, writes things about them in notebooks. Some of the girls refuse to sit near him in class. I asked to see the notebooks. At first, she hesitated, but eventually slid one across her desk. My stomach lurched as I read page after page filled with Ethan's cramped handwriting, lists of classmates' weaknesses, imagined scenarios of accidents, detailed observations of Sophie's routines, when she left for school, how long it took her to walk home, even the route her mom drove. This doesn't mean he'll act on it, Mrs. Harlow said cautiously, but it does mean he needs intervention. Michael, when I showed him, was furious. Not at Ethan, but at me. You're feeding into their paranoia. Do you really want our son labeled? Do you know what that could do to his future? I shouted back for the first time in years. What future are you talking about, Michael? The one where he hurts someone. We didn't speak for 2 days after that. At home, Ethan seemed to sense the shift. He walked taller, moved with a confidence that made me uneasy. He would watch me cook, eyes fixed not on the food, but on the knives I was holding. When I set them down, he'd smile faintly, like we shared some private joke. Once, I found him in the garage, running his fingers along the hedge clippers. When I asked what he was doing, he said, just thinking about how easy it would be. I forced myself to ask, easy for what? His reply was calm. Too calm. For anything. I told Michael that night. His response, stop letting your imagination run wild. But my imagination wasn't the problem. The problem was real, growing, and sitting across from me at every meal. Isolation pressed in from all sides. Friends stopped calling. Neighbors avoided eye contact. Even family began making excuses not to visit. My mother suggested maybe Ethan needed stricter discipline, as if grounding him could cure whatever darkness was blooming inside him. The worst came one icy December evening. I was walking home from the clinic when I saw Sophie again. She was outside shoveling her driveway, bundled in a red scarf. For a moment, I thought of waving, of offering to help. But then I saw him, Ethan, standing at the corner, half hidden by a tree, just watching her. I froze. Ethan! I shouted across the street. He turned slowly, his face unreadable, and walked toward me without a word. What were you doing? I demanded when he reached me. Walking, he said simply. You were staring at Sophie. His lips curled into the faintest smile. You always think the worst of me, Mom. That night, Sophie's parents called ours. They said Ethan had been following her again, that Sophie was terrified. Michael tried to smooth things over, swearing we'd handle it, but their message was clear. If it continued, they would go to the police. After the call, Michael slumped onto the couch, rubbing his temples. We can't let this spiral out of control. It's already out of control. I snapped. Ethan appeared in the doorway then, silent, watching us argue. His eyes flicked between us like he was savoring the cracks in our marriage. Finally, he said softly, you should stop fighting. People might think you don't love each other anymore. The way he said it, so calm, so knowing, made the hairs on my neck stand on end. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. Ethan wasn't just isolating me from neighbors, friends, and the school. He was isolating me from my own husband. I went to bed that night with a pit in my stomach. For the first time, I locked our bedroom door. Not to keep strangers out, but to keep my own son from coming in. By winter, I could no longer convince myself Ethan was just difficult. I was living with a stranger whose every move felt calculated. The boy who used to curl against me during thunderstorms now watched me like I was part of some private experiment. The revelation, the moment when denial finally shattered, came in January. It was a Friday evening. Michael had taken a late shift, and I was home alone with Ethan. I decided to do laundry, gathering clothes from his room. As I pulled shirts from his closet, a notebook slipped from the top shelf and landed at my feet. Something about the way it was hidden made my heart race. I opened it. Page after page was filled with diagrams, notes, and sketches. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then the pieces came together, and ice filled my veins. It wasn't just a diary. It was a playbook. He had written out names, mostly classmates, but Sophie's name appeared over and over. Beneath it were detailed observations. What time she left her house, the days her mom worked late, even the exact angle of the Novak family's back gate latch. There were maps of the neighborhood, escape routes drawn in pencil, lists of tools he might need. Duct tape. Rope. A flashlight. I turned a page and froze. There, in crude but unmistakable sketches, was Sophie tied to a chair. Beneath it, written in block letters, she'll stop being perfect then. I dropped the notebook, hands trembling so badly I could barely breathe. My vision blurred as bile rose in my throat. Looking for something? I spun around. Ethan stood in the doorway, silent, watching me. My heart pounded. What is this? I demanded, my voice shaking. He tilted his head, expression eerily calm. Just ideas. Ethan, this is sick. Is it? His tone was so casual, it made me want to scream. Writers make stories. Artists make drawings. I make plans. That doesn't mean I'll do them. But you've been following her. Threatening her. His eyes glinted. And she's scared, isn't she? That means it worked. The room spun. I wanted to shout, to drag him to a psychiatrist that very second, but fear rooted me to the floor. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You shouldn't have gone through my things, Mom. It's not safe. Not safe. He said it like a warning, not a complaint. That night, I hid the notebook in my bag and barely slept, heart hammering with every creak of the house. When Michael came home, I tried to show him, desperate for him to finally see. But Michael only skimmed a few pages before shoving it shut. It's fantasy, Clara. Disturbing, yes, but lots of kids write creepy things. Stephen King probably drew worse when he was 12. I wanted to scream. This isn't fiction, Michael. This is Sophie. He's stalking her. But Michael's jaw tightened. Do you want our son institutionalized? Do you want his life ruined? He needs discipline, not handcuffs. That was the moment I realized Michael would never face the truth, and I was on my own. A few days later, the Novak family found their back gate wide open. Sophie's bike was gone. It turned up in a ditch half a mile away, chain snapped, seat slashed. They called the police. Officers came to our house, asking questions. Ethan sat at the table, calm and polite, insisting he had nothing to do with it. He even offered them cookies I'd baked that morning, smiling like the perfect boy. They left with no proof, but Sophie's parents were done. They pulled her out of school, hired security cameras, and warned every neighbor about Ethan. The isolation became unbearable. People crossed the street to avoid me. Parents whispered when I walked by. Even at church, I saw the way they stared, pity and fear in equal measure. One night, I found Ethan sitting at the kitchen table, scribbling again. When I tried to peek, he slid the paper toward me. It was a sketch of our family, me, Michael, and Ethan. But in the drawing, Michael and I were lying on the ground, faces blank. Ethan stood above us, smiling. I couldn't breathe. Why would you draw this? He leaned back, folding his arms. Because sometimes I wonder what it would be like if it was just me. The words lodged in my chest like glass shards. That was the night I finally admitted what I had been avoiding for years. My son wasn't just troubled. He wasn't just going through a phase. My son was dangerous. And if I didn't act soon, someone was going to get hurt. The night I saw Ethan's drawing of our family lying lifeless at his feet, something in me finally broke. Fear stopped being a vague cloud hanging over my days. It solidified into resolve. If Michael wouldn't act, if the police shrugged without evidence, then it was on me to protect Sophie, our neighbors, and myself. I started quietly. While Ethan was at school, I copied every page of his notebook at the library. The staff gave me curious looks as the copier spat out sheets filled with disturbing sketches and obsessive notes, but I forced myself to stand tall. I kept the originals hidden in a locked drawer at the clinic where I worked, afraid Ethan might discover them missing. Next, I bought a small recording device, slipping it into my pocket whenever I was alone with him. I needed proof, not just suspicions, not just words twisted into mother's paranoia. Real, undeniable evidence. It didn't take long. One evening, I was making dinner when Ethan wandered into the kitchen, eyeing the knife block. He picked up a chef's knife, weighing it in his hands, running his thumb along the blade. Sharp, isn't it? He murmured. Put it down, I said firmly. He glanced at me, smiling faintly. You know, Mom, it only takes a few seconds. That's all. My stomach clenched, but I forced my voice steady. Seconds for what? His eyes glimmered. To make someone stop breathing. The recording caught it all. His calm tone, my trembling voice. When I played it back later, my blood turned to ice. I brought the evidence to Michael, but his reaction was the same. Denial, anger, dismissal. Do you hear yourself, Clara? You sound insane. He's a boy experimenting with dark thoughts. If you keep pushing this narrative, you'll destroy him. But I knew the truth. Ethan wasn't experimenting. He was rehearsing. The counterstrike wasn't just about collecting proof, it was about creating distance. I began changing the locks when Ethan left for school. At night, I moved the knives from the kitchen into a locked box in our bedroom. I started sleeping with the dresser pushed against the door, heart pounding at every creak of the floorboards. Neighbors still avoided me, but one person finally listened. Sophie's mother, Angela. I showed her copies of the notebook pages, the recording of Ethan's voice. Tears welled in her eyes as she gripped my hand. Clara, you need to protect yourself. If Michael won't help, go around him. She gave me the number of a private investigator she knew from her job in insurance. He can't make arrests, but he can document patterns, build a case. Sometimes, that's enough. I hired him. His name was Harris, a grizzled man with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor. He began discreetly following Ethan after school, snapping photos of him loitering outside the Novak house, lingering near Sophie's bus stop. Within a week, Harris handed me a folder of evidence. He's escalating, he warned. This isn't just fantasy anymore. He's rehearsing. The word echoed in my head, rehearsing. I knew then what I had to do. I scheduled an emergency appointment with a child psychiatrist, Dr. Leone. Convincing Michael was nearly impossible. He accused me of pathologizing normal boyhood, but I lied, telling Ethan it was just a routine health check. The session was chilling. Ethan charmed Dr. Leone at first, answering questions smoothly, even making jokes. But when the doctor asked about his drawings, Ethan's mask slipped. They're not drawings, he said calmly. They're blueprints. Dr. Leone's pen froze mid-note. When asked if he understood why people might find them disturbing, Ethan tilted his head. Because people don't like to face the truth. Everyone has violent thoughts. I'm just honest about mine. The session ended quickly after that. Dr. Leone pulled me aside, his face pale. Mrs. Grant, your son shows signs of severe conduct disorder, possibly early psychopathy. He needs intensive intervention, immediately. Finally, validation. But also terror. Because as I drove Ethan home that evening, he sat beside me in silence, then whispered, You told him things, didn't you? You made me look bad. I gripped the wheel tighter, praying he couldn't hear my pounding heart. That night, I placed a call I never imagined making. I called Child Protective Services. It felt like betraying my son. But in my gut, I knew I wasn't betraying him. I was protecting everyone else. The next morning, Ethan didn't go to school. A social worker and 2 officers arrived instead, asking him to come with them for an evaluation. He didn't resist. He just looked at me, his smile slow and deliberate. You think you've won, he said quietly. I couldn't answer. My throat was too tight. As they let him out, I felt the crushing weight of guilt and relief colliding in my chest. This was my counterstrike. My attempt to draw a line in the sand before it was too late. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. When CPS escorted Ethan out of the house, I thought naively that the nightmare was finally over. I imagined weeks of evaluations, doctor's notes, therapy sessions, maybe even a residential program where he'd be kept safe, and we'd be kept safe from him. But monsters don't vanish because you sign a form. They adapt. They wait. For 2 weeks, the house was unbearably quiet. No slammed doors, no heavy footsteps at night. No eyes watching me from the shadows. I started to sleep again, though never deeply. Michael, meanwhile, grew bitter, accusing me of destroying our family and branding our son forever. "He's our child, Clara," he snapped one night. "Do you realize what you've done to him? To us. What about Sophie? ISH*T back. What about every other child he's stalked and threatened? Do they not matter?" Michael didn't answer. He just poured himself another drink and sat in silence. Then came the call. CPS reported that Ethan had been released after only 10 days. He had cooperated, shown remorse, and posed no immediate risk. The system, overloaded, underfunded, blind, had believed him. Michael was relieved. See? He just needed a scare. He'll come home, and we'll handle things as a family. But I felt the blood drain from my face. Ethan was coming back. And I knew what that meant. The night he returned, he walked through the door with that same calm smile. He hugged Michael, shook hands with the social worker, thanked them politely. When his eyes met mine, the smile didn't reach them. Later, when we were alone in the kitchen, he leaned close. "You shouldn't have done that, Mom. Now I know exactly what you're capable of. And you should know what I'm capable of too." My knees nearly gave out. That week was hell. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow felt like his. He no longer hid his darkness. He flaunted it. He left the lockbox of knives open one morning, blades gleaming in the light. He left sketches of Sophie on the fridge, tucked between grocery lists, as if daring me to react. Michael refused to see it. He's pushing boundaries. Ignore him, and it'll pass. But it wouldn't pass. I knew it. The final showdown came one stormy Saturday. Rain pounded the windows, thunder rattled the walls. I was folding laundry when I realized the house was too quiet. Ethan wasn't in his room. I checked the garage, and froze. Sophie was there. She stood trembling, her hands bound with duct tape, her eyes wide with terror. Ethan was beside her, holding the hedge clippers, his expression calm, almost serene. "Ethan!" I screamed. "What are you doing?" He looked up, unfazed. "Just proving a point." I rushed forward, heart hammering. "Untie her. Now." "She's always been perfect," he said softly, almost wistfully. "Everyone loves Sophie. But when she screams, when she cries, no one will see her as perfect anymore. They'll see she's just like the rest of us." "Please," Sophie sobbed, muffled through the tape. I moved closer, forcing steel into my voice. "Ethan, put the clippers down. This isn't you." He tilted his head, smiling faintly. "It's exactly me." For a split second, I saw the boy I had raised, the child who once brought me drawings of dragons, who begged for extra bedtime stories. But that boy was gone, swallowed by something I couldn't recognize. I lunged, knocking the clippers from his hand. They clattered to the floor. He shoved me hard, sending me crashing into the workbench. Pain *T up my side, but adrenaline pushed me forward. "Run, Sophie," I shouted, yanking the tape from her wrists. She bolted for the door, sobbing, disappearing into the storm. Ethan didn't chase her. He just stood there, watching me, his face expressionless. Then slowly, he whispered, "You chose her over me." The words cut deeper than any blade. By the time Michael rushed into the garage, Sophie had already reached her parents' house, screaming for help. The police arrived minutes later. Ethan didn't resist. He walked calmly to the squad car, even thanking the officers as they cuffed him. As they drove him away, he turned his head toward me, his smile returning. "This isn't over, Mom," he mouthed through the glass. And I believed him. That night, I sat on the floor of the garage, shaking, tears streaming down my face. The storm raged outside, but inside, all I could hear were his words. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The night after Ethan was taken away for the second time, the house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a hollow shell, a stage where every lie and fear had played out under our roof. Michael sat on the couch, head in his hands, staring at nothing. His wedding ring gleamed in the lamplight, but it looked more like a shackle than a symbol of love. I wanted to reach for him to share comfort, but there was a chasm between us now, one carved by denial, anger, and a son neither of us could understand. Sophie refused to come back inside. She stayed at her friend's house, terrified that Ethan would somehow return that night, slip through the storm, and finish what he started. I couldn't blame her. I wouldn't have felt safe either. The police left us with paperwork, warnings, and hollow reassurances. "He'll be evaluated again. This time, it'll be more thorough," one officer said. I nodded, but inside I knew the truth. Systems don't change overnight. And Ethan wasn't going to change either. In the following days, I moved through life like a ghost. I cleaned blood off the garage floor from where I had scraped my arm. I threw away Sophie's shredded jump rope that Ethan had used as his mock restraints. Every object became a reminder, every silence a threat. Michael tried to keep normalcy alive. He made breakfast, asked me about bills, even suggested we watch a movie one night. But every word he spoke carried an undertone of blame. I had betrayed Ethan. I had escalated things. If I had just trusted him more, maybe none of this would have happened. But then I'd look at Sophie, pale, quiet, traumatized, and I knew I had done the only thing a mother could do. I had chosen survival. One afternoon, weeks later, I received a letter. It wasn't from CPS, or the court, or the police. It was from Ethan. The handwriting was meticulous, his spelling perfect, every word carefully placed on the page. Mom, you think you won because I was taken away. But you don't understand yet. I'm not gone. I'm learning. I'm waiting. You chose her over me, but in the end, you'll see, it doesn't matter who you choose. Everyone loses, eventually. My hands shook as I read it. I burned the letter in the sink before Michael came home, not because I wanted to hide it, but because I couldn't bear the weight of its existence in our house. At night, I still wake to the echo of his voice, to the phantom creak of his footsteps in the hallway. I keep Sophie's bedroom locked, though she no longer sleeps here. I keep a kitchen knife by my nightstand, not because I want to use it, but because I need the illusion of control. People ask me now, how did you know? When did you realize? The truth is, there wasn't one moment. It wasn't the frog dissected without permission. It wasn't the lifeless cat in the woods. It wasn't even the garage showdown. It was all of it. 1,000 shards of warning, ignored until they cut too deep to hide. And now, as I sit in the quiet, I wonder what kind of mother it makes me. One who fears her own son. One who no longer dreams of saving him, but only of surviving him. Parents are supposed to protect their children. No one warns you what it means when the child is the danger. No one tells you that sometimes, raising a psychopath doesn't end with redemption. It ends with a countdown, waiting for the next letter, the next release, the next inevitable knock on the door. And every night, I ask myself one question. When that day comes, will I be ready?